Very happy to have your expertise on the line today.
Thanks, Pat.
Steve Mulch is our other presenter today, and Steve is currently the president of Veritas Training Group. Over the last 10 years, Steve has worked with over 100 companies, helping them improve their business development skills and processes. His customers include Fidelity, Colliers, LexisNexis, IDC, Anthem Blue Cross, Blue Shield, and USI Insurance. Before founding Veritas, Steve spent 31 years working in the packaging industry, where he was Director of National Sales for Packaging Corporation of America and Vice President and General Manager for James River Specialty Packaging. Steve is also an affiliate of Sales6, a company that offers powerful pipeline application that integrates with both Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics. Thank you, Steve, for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Pat. Thank you.
Yeah. So the current reality is that everyone has less time and more to do, and quotas never go down. One of the main pain points for those of you in sales leadership is that you invest a lot of time in coaching, but it's not always paying off. Our presentation today will answer this critical question: how to get a better ROI on the time you invest in coaching. And to do that, we're going to cover 6 critical topics along this subject. The first topic, managing both activity and effectiveness. Next, we'll talk about CRM and coaching. Finally, next after that, leading versus trailing indicators. And finally, but certainly not least, having the hard conversation. So let's jump right in. Managing both activity and effectiveness is our first area that we're going to explore. You know, both salespeople and sales leaders often confuse sales activity with selling. For some, there's a belief that just doing something is better than doing nothing. This leads to a lot of coaching time being spent on how to increase activity, but enhancing that with an emphasis on effectiveness will get you to the overall objective of increasing your ROI regarding coaching. This is a critical area and a place where, if done right, you can really leverage your time. Bob, let's start with you. Can you shed some light on the right way to manage the balance between activity and effectiveness?
Yeah, you know, it is a balance, and before I talk about this a little bit, this whole topic, as you mentioned, on coaching and development, the association completed some pretty extensive research on frontline selling reps, asking them what is their number 1 and number 2 and 3 challenge and need. A clear second, the first was quantity and quality of leads. Number 2, kind of hard to believe, they identified that training, coaching, and development was their number 2 need. I mean, it ranked above compensation and career path, if you could believe that. So today's sales reps are asking for good coaching and training, so we owe it to them, and it's great to talk about this topic. So managing activity and effectiveness, and as I speak at conferences in front of hundreds of sales leaders, I'd ask the question, you know, why is it that today's sales management, why do we measure so much? So many things, so many metrics, and time again, the answer is, well, because we can, right? And if you think about the advancements in CRM, telephony, voice over IP, there's just so much out there to measure, and we have so many metrics we put out there, and you know, well, how do we you know, use those? What are the right things to measure? And it seems like each year passes, we look for some sort of magical metric that's going to make the equation add up to more sales, and I'm not sure we have it quite right yet. So it goes beyond activity, and I think this thing on effectiveness is really important. I think sometimes we lose sight of that, and we go back time and time again to how many calls did we make and how many demos did we do. So Steve, I know you have some thoughts on the 2 of these. Can you comment?
Yeah, absolutely, Bob. A few years ago, in thinking about sales, it really became apparent that sales is fairly straightforward. It is activity times effectiveness. In other words, how good are you at what you do? That's your level of effectiveness. And how often do you do it? That's your level of activity. And I think it's helpful for managers to understand the fact that, in reality, one of these is a choice. A salesperson makes a decision every day, every week about their level of activity. They can't choose their level of effectiveness. If you saw me play golf, this would resonate. If I said to you, you know, I've chosen to shoot a 72 this weekend, well, the reality is that might happen if I quit after 9. I'm not a very good golfer. I can't choose to be better at something. I can work on it. I can take lessons. I can go to the driving range. But every day, every week, a salesperson makes a decision about their level of activity. Therefore, I actually believe that that factor is more leverageable than the other one is. In any one sales organization, we find a variety of people. So sometimes we find people that look like this. They will have, quite frankly, a high level of effectiveness. In other words, they're very good at what they do. But for various and sundry reasons, they don't do it very often. Sometimes we have people that have retired on the job. The results show up that way. And then we have people that look like this. They have a very high level of activity, but they don't have much effectiveness at this point. A lot of times these are junior people. They're still learning the products, they're learning the marketplace, but they're working extremely hard. And then we have people that look like this. They're neither active nor effective. Frankly, they're probably not long for the organization, and they're not necessarily bad people. They're simply miscast. And so if I go to the one above and I look at the big A and the small e, what I know is that if I can keep a high level of activity from these folks, over time I can help them to become more effective. I can train them, I can coach them, I can mentor them, but I need that activity level to be sustained. If I go to the next one above, the big E and the small a, these are people who are very good at what they do, and again, they don't do it very often. They can, but they won't. And sometimes we find that fairly frustrating. And so my point is this. I think as a manager, I've got to be asking myself at all times when it comes to coaching, do I have the right level of activity, and how good are my people at closing business, and how can I tell? Because I think the first big question in trying to help people is, I need to understand whether this person has an activity issue or do they have an effectiveness issue. I really need to make that decision up front because I need to know where to focus my time to help them improve. And please recognize that the effectiveness piece takes a lot longer than the activity piece does. Thanks, Pat.
Thank you, Steve. That's really helpful. Just a couple of questions have come in. One is, how do I know if my people have a high enough level of activity?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And people will ask me the same thing. They say, okay, Steve, you talk about an activity level, but what should it look like? Mm-hmm. I think the key there is, and I find a lot of organizations, frankly, don't necessarily have a good handle on their closing ratios. If a salesperson doesn't truly understand how many opportunities it takes for them to have in play at any one time for them to project a certain level of sales, if they don't understand what their closing ratios are, when I first started my business, I finally developed an understanding that it took me 6 initial engagements to make 1 sale. After I understood that, I then could decide how many initial engagements do I need to make in order for me to make the money I want to show up with. Mm-hmm. And so the answer to that question is, how well do you understand your closing ratios? That's going to drive your activity level.
Got it. You mentioned that one is harder to improve than the other. Why is that? What impacts that?
Well, I don't know that one is harder to improve than the other. What I know is that one takes longer to improve. Mm-hmm. You know, you cannot get better at something overnight. You cannot improve your effectiveness overnight. It mm-hmm. takes time to become an increasingly effective salesperson. But the activity piece is leverageable faster. I think that's mm-hmm. the major point. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you. Just for the sake of time, I want to move on to our next topic, but thank you for the questions. The next one is CRM and coaching. So, when CRMs were first introduced, they were looked upon as the holy grail. Everybody would have all the information and data they needed at their fingertips, and it would cure most, if not all, ills. But based on the results, too often it looks like installing the CRM might have given a false sense of security. And having the data and knowing how to use it for effective coaching are two different things. I don't know, to me it's like a batting coach talking to a batter, and all he does is feed him his latest batting statistics and stops it at that point. So, Bob, what's your take on this?
Well, I think that's a really good description of what we as managers, we kind of get caught in this trap, don't we? And you take a look at the picture here. Does it look familiar? It's the manager that is kind of glued to their CRM dashboard, looking at these, as you put it, these batting statistics. In this case, it's the sales statistics. I was down in Atlanta last week at a conference, and I had a good conversation with a VP of sales who had been doing it for a long time at a very large company, and we got on this topic of what we measure and what we do with it. And he told me, the true story. He goes, I get this monthly packet, and he said it's nearly 100 pages, and it was all statistics. And it really gets back to what Steve talked about in terms of the activity versus effectiveness. And I think what happens is the manager tends to default to the activity and the metrics when he tries to fix something. And as Steve mentioned, it takes a long time to improve effectiveness. And you know what? Managers got to be committed to that. They got to get away from this picture we see on the screen. They got to get away from the data and actually in the cubes and in the offices doing some really good coaching and invest in the effectiveness piece of the equation. CRM tools are great, right? It's good that we have dashboards, but we have to balance the two. We have to know how to use the statistics, if you will, the metrics, if you will, but to really apply them to the effectiveness piece of the equation through some good coaching. Steve, your thoughts on that?
Certainly. I picked up a book a few weeks ago. The name of the book is Cracking the Sales Management Code by Jason Jordan. And there was the foreword to that book was written by Neil Rackham, the author of Spin Selling, a system that's been around for years. And what Neil said was, he said, it's important to know what your CRM does, and even more important to know what it doesn't do. That was the key part for me. What am I getting from my CRM? What really helps me and what helps my salespeople, and what doesn't? Over the years, as I've run my sales training business, the question you see on the screen, I've asked hundreds of vice presidents of sales managers. I'll ask them the question: is your CRM driving the behavior of your salespeople? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. The behavior is not changing. And we know that according to many studies, over 70% of all CRM implementations fail to meet expectations. And don't get me wrong, I think every organization needs to have this tool as a part of their sales operations. But what I believe also is that we've got to make these tools easier to use. They need to be fast, and most importantly, if they're going to be a coaching device, if it's going to give me information around which to coach, then it needs to be relevant. The salesperson needs to find that the CRM is absolutely relevant and is helping them to drive the performance of their job. In order to do that, I think that one of the keys is that the CRM needs to be more forward-looking. It needs to give me a picture of the future. And so if we look at the next slide, it gives us an idea of a picture inside of a CRM. I'm looking at a sales pipeline, and it's very graphic. And I think salespeople react better to graphics and pictures. Sometimes I tell folks that a picture is worth 1,000 words and 2,000 spreadsheets. The more graphic you can make your CRM representations, the better people are going to react to them. And I think that we need to create an objective platform whereby we can visually see what people are doing, and it gives us a platform to have better conversations. Our CRM needs to be a diagnostic tool. It needs to help us spot where people are having troubles, where they're challenging, where they're succeeding, because if I can have a better diagnostic, I can better understand where do I need to coach. And also I need to make sure that I'm focusing on the performance versus focusing on the person. Frankly, we'll talk about that a little more further in our conversation. So to be more specific, I'm looking at patterns that my visuals start to reveal. And so if I take the one in the upper left-hand corner, sometimes we dub this success vacation. You know, at times, salespeople, when they get a lot of business closed, they kind of step back and go, "Whew, man, I've nailed it. I'm in a great spot." And then if you'll notice upstream, there's very little activity. There are very few opportunities in the early part of the pipeline. Sometimes people get wrapped up implementing what they've sold for a lot of very good reasons, and then they stop doing the very thing that caused their success. And then they wake up 30 days from now, 60, 90 days, 6 months from now, and they go, the market fell apart. Guys, the market's just in a downturn. No, it's not. They stopped doing the very thing that caused their success, but they couldn't see it in the moment. Neither could the manager. If we move over to the right-hand picture on the upper right-hand corner, this is an example of what happens to a lot of salespeople when they start hanging on to a lot of dead deals. In other words, there are a lot of opportunities that are stuck in the pipeline. They're not really going anywhere, but the salesperson doesn't have anything else going on. I bet if I go in and look at those opportunities, a lot of them have close dates that are 60 days ago. But for whatever reason, the salesperson hasn't fessed up to it because they're trying to look busy. I need to be able to spot that in the moment and have a concrete conversation about it. If I move to the lower left-hand side, I call that one the skinny pipeline. In other words, they just don't have enough going on. They don't really have a chance of overcoming their closing ratios. A lot of times when you see a pipeline like this, it's because there's one big deal in there that they're betting the ranch on. So it'll sound like this. Hey, listen, boss, as long as I close this one, I'm in great shape. Well, the question is, what if you don't? And then moving to the lower right-hand corner, when I look at that picture, I wonder what's going on. This person seems to be setting some meetings, but they never get to proposal stage. I wonder if they're drinking a lot of coffee and they're enjoying their visits, but it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. Well, why is that? What's not taking place in the early portion of the sales process that's causing people not to get enough proposals in the marketplace? So that's what I mean when I say if we can create more visuals within our CRM to give people better pictures, our discussions can be more pointed and more relevant. Thanks, Pat.
We have a couple questions, but I want to lead with one that what you just mentioned really brings up for me. And you're talking about pictures. As you both know, I'm quite a student of the millennials, and I think back, Bob, to the earlier discussion about the demand for coaching and then this need for visuals. Is that particularly more effective with the millennial generation?
You know, I'll make a quick comment on that. I've done some benchmarking at a couple of companies, one down in Washington, D.C., who hires about 30 pretty much right out of college folks who do business development, and they have this what we call gamification, right? They have large visual charts displayed on monitors as to the day's results, as to individual leaderboard, and it seems like that, that demographic just eats it up. They love it. That competition, that digital interface to how the activity and results are going. So we're starting to hear more and more about the implementation of gamification.
Yeah. I guess, my thought is they have been learning everything from pictures anyway. So we had a couple other questions that came in from participants. It said, when installing a CRM, what do we need to do to ensure its success? How do we improve the success rate?
Pat, my opinion is that, and maybe this is that the sales management group, has to have their hands all over the decision process and the implementation process. I think one of the biggest challenges that I see in the marketplace when people go to implement a CRM is quite frankly, when the IT department has run the project and sales management has not had the opportunity to make sure that the CRM is reflecting the actual sales process of the company. I think that becomes a huge issue. And so they end up with a tool that frankly is not reflecting the way they want to manage their sales organizations. And that's a crime, and therefore the adoption goes way down. In fact, sometimes even the managers throw up their hands because they haven't invested heavily in the development of what they want that tool to do.
Yeah, good. So have a voice in the outcome from the very beginning.
From the very beginning.
And one other question from someone said, our sales cycle is very short, kind of virtually transactional. How does a detailed pipeline report figure into that kind of an equation?
Well, that's a good one. I'm not endorsing this at all, but I've seen some groups that have very quick turnaround sales cycles, and by the time they engage with the prospect, they're actually in Salesforce entering an estimate. That's how quick it is, right? So they're capturing it, but you can do that, and you can have your dashboard set up to reflect that part of the quick transaction, even if it's a demo estimate close, right, within 3 days. But you can also use it. There's business development happening even with a lot of companies that have a quick sales cycle. So I would encourage capturing that as well. And Steve, you may have a comment on that as well.
Yeah, I certainly, if it's a situation where there's a one-call close, I think it gets more difficult. But I think in most business transactions, that's not the case. And unless we have an effective system of capturing what's in our pipeline, we're flying blind. And so I think it's still important for us to understand whether or not there's an activity level that's high enough for us to have a predictable outcome. That's my opinion.
Yeah, certainly necessary for coaching, because what we're really saying in this whole presentation is you have to have stats to begin with and have some information. So that would make some sense. Good. Let's move on to our third topic, leading versus trailing indicators. So, we have historical stats for just about everything at our fingertips, year over year, quarter over quarter, performance to quota, number of appointments, number of calls completed, you name it. But Steve, I'm wondering, when it comes to effective coaching, how much attention should we be paying to all of this historical data?
Well, I'm sure everybody's looking at the slide now, and they said that is a very odd slide, and it's drawn that way on purpose. In working with so many sales organizations, too many times I find that we're driving the car looking backwards. This is a prescription for an accident. This is not a great way to drive a car unless you want to go backwards. I think our historical data is important, but all it is that. It's historical data. It tells me where I've been. It doesn't show me where I'm going. Here's the reality. How I did against last year is important. How am I doing against plan is important. But what's already happened, I can't change. I cannot change history. I can only change the future. And so if we don't have tools in place that tell us what's coming so that I can tell 2 months from now, 3 months, 6 months from now, whether or not I'm assured of making my number, my trailing indicators are worthless if I can't get a clear picture of the future. And that's where I want to engage with my salespeople. I want to use the historical information, but I need to be able to have a conversation with them about what's coming next. What are they going to change? What are they going to do differently in order for them to have more success? And as a matter of fact, we've kind of come up with a couple of conversations here. And Bob and I decided that we'd role play this. And I'm going to be the manager, and Bob's going to be Randy. And so, Bob, if you're ready, let's have our first conversation here about managing by results.
You just take it easy on me now, okay?
You bet, you bet. So, Randy, I'm concerned about your performance. As we discussed last week, it's June, and you're 16% behind plan.
Yeah, I share your concern. I do.
Well, that's great, but I need some specifics. So what are you going to do, Randy? What's your plan?
Man, I got to pick up the pace of my activity. I can do that. I promise you I'm going to get busier, make more calls, and, just get more active.
Yeah, certainly. Well, based on your year-to-date performance, you'll need to close an additional $1.4 million over the current budget between now and the end of the year. Is that possible, Randy?
It's a challenge, but I do have quite a bit amount of new business on the horizon that I'm chasing.
Okay, well, can you tell me what are you looking at? What's out there?
I gotta believe there's probably $3 million out there that I'm chasing.
Well, Randy, I really need you to bear down and close those deals. You know how much I'm counting on you, Randy.
I know I'm behind, but listen, I'm going to work hard. I'm going to do everything I can to close the gap.
Okay, all right. I know that you will. I know you can do it, Randy. Go get them, Tiger. Now, I imagine that conversation is a conversation that some of the people on the call, or many of the people of us on this call, have experienced on one level or another. And the reality is that conversation wasn't all that helpful for Randy. I don't really think that necessarily Randy's going to do a whole lot differently based upon that conversation. So let's look at another conversation. It's the same scenario. We've got the manager and Randy, but I think this conversation is going to go a little differently. So Randy, I'm concerned about your performance as we discussed last week. It's June and you're 16% behind plan.
I know, but listen, I'm feeling really good about this Krause & Son deal that I just uncovered. If I land that one, it's going to be a big one. I'm right back at plan.
Yeah, and if you don't land that one, where are you?
It's a good point. I'm really counting on that. If I don't get it, I'm probably going to miss the quarter.
Randy, you're risking too much on winning one account. What else do you need to do at this point?
Well, probably what I need to do is get more into the first part of the funnel, right? Back myself up with more opportunities, just in case if that one doesn't come through.
Well, obviously, I mean that is obvious. I certainly agree with you, but I think I'd like to hear some more specifics about that.
Listen, I have to do more. I have to make more calls. I got to hustle more, and I got to fill that pipeline.
Well, let me ask you a question. At this point, what's the average size of a new account for you? Where have you been tracking?
Yeah, so year to date, it's right around that $250,000 mark for each new account, except this Krause & Son deal, which I'm feeling good about. Right, that's $1.5 million. They got so many users that one's going to get me to my plan.
Yeah, and I hope you land that one too. Don't get me wrong, and I think that's a great opportunity. But the reality is that your chances of winning that deal are no greater than winning any other deal, Randy. I mean, that's the hard, cold truth. And it's critical that you close the 1.4 million, which is around 6 new accounts. And I looked at your current closing ratio, which is about 1 in 4 or 25%. If that's all true, you're going to need to work 24 prospects to hit your number.
Wow. Listen, you got the math right there, but 24, it's just, I'll be honest with you, I don't think it's feasible. I don't think I can work that many. In addition, I got to take care of my current clients with their service needs. I'm not sure how I can fit that all into a normal day or week.
Okay, and frankly, I agree with you. So what do you think the answer is?
Well, I've had some success with these mid-tier accounts that are closer to $500,000. Now, if I could get a few of those in, that's going to go a long way to closing the gap. So maybe it's looking at ways to target and prospect and get to some of those mid-tier level accounts. What do you think?
Well, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, the reality is this. We can't change what's happened for the first 6 months of the year. We are where we are. What we can change is what happens between now and the end of the year. So I think the next thing we need to talk about is really to get together and talk about specifically what you're going to need to do in order to march up to those larger accounts, what it's going to take to get these closed, get them identified, get them into the pipeline, and move forward. Randy, I look forward to working with you on this.
Yeah, me too. That does make sense. Thanks.
Excellent, excellent. So we just, we're obviously we're working to make a point here with these two coaching conversations. One was very general. The other was much more specific. One was a little bit of a rah-rah speech. The other one was very much looking at today's data, but looking forward and how we apply that data to the future so we can make good decisions about where we go next. Thanks, Pat.
Yeah, thank you. I think that obviously made a huge difference in what Randy will do next. So a couple of questions that have come in. One of them, maybe there's other people on the phone thinking what this person said is, are you telling me I should ignore my traditional reports? I suppose a lot of people have a lot of them that have the history. What do we do about that?
My opinion is no, absolutely not. Don't ignore your historical reports. It's important information. It gives us data that's important to analyze what happens next, and so we need that traditional information. We just need to remember is the fact that we can't change it.
Got it. Bob, any thoughts?
Yeah, I kind of echo what Steve said. I'd also point to a lot of the data that we get today can help you with some of these leading indicators that we talked about, right? And you obviously can't ignore that, otherwise you get into that one scenario Steve pointed out where the rep hit his quarterly number but was missing a lot in the early stages. So listen, reports and your CRM dashboards can be very helpful. We have to allow those and set them up to help us be successful with then how we address sales reps and how we coach.
Yeah, so don't ignore them. They can inform the leading indicators as
Right.
well. Got it. And one other, which leading indicators are most important? We've got a whole dashboard full.
Well, and not to avoid this question, it really does depend on the business, the length of a sales cycle, whether it's short or long. As an example, we have a business here at Merrill that is very transactional, and we just introduced a new one that is what we measure so far is probably 5 to 6 months in terms of a sales cycle. So we know we're beginning to find out what breeds success, and one of the things that we found out was having a systems engineer actually visit the customer to do a trial. So we're leaning a lot on those type of activities, if you will, right? Stages in the pipeline. We know if we can get that accomplished, it's a leading indicator which ends up in a pretty good close rate. So I think it depends, and you have to know what's important to your business that's going to move a sale along.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Okay, we're going to head over to our last topic, and it is a hard one. So no one looks forward to having hard conversations about performance, but it's one of the sales leader's most important jobs, and the need for it will inevitably come up. If avoided, something that happens far too often, you'll pay a high price. If done right, it can set both parties up for successful course correction, and your ROI will be meaningful. So Bob, let's start with you. What tips can you share to make the hard conversations easier and more effective?
Yeah, sure. You know, it's probably why us sales managers, when we do quarterly reviews or annual reviews, we like to get the good ones out of the way first. So we schedule those first, and sometimes we save the hard ones for later. Here's some tips, and again, these are things that I've sort of have helped me over the years of having hard conversations. The first thing that I come back to time and time again, if it's a very difficult situation, and maybe it's a performance conversation even, one of the things that I often remind myself is it ultimately is going to benefit the individual. And I draw upon things like athletes that fail, that even have been cut from teams that later work hard and go on to succeed and maybe in a different position or a different team. So just remember that delivering tough, hard conversation like that ultimately will benefit that person if you do it well. So it's in their benefit. The other piece is the manager doesn't always have to be the one doing all the talking, right? In fact, the ideal scenario is where the individual sales rep discovers and agrees with some of the gaps or some of the things they need to improve on their own. So a good discussion would be a manager who probes with open-ended questions. How do you think the current quarter is going in terms of your pipeline, the first third of the pipeline? How do you think it's going? What does it look like to you? A related tip to that would be, and I've often done this, is instead of me, the manager, printing out reports or dashboards, I ask the rep, well, you have access to it, so you're going to present to me your health check, right? So they come in and they present to me and they say, well, here's where I am, and as you know, as you can see, I'm a little weak in this area, and when they come to the conclusion on their own, it's that much more powerful. This third bullet here, a sandwich technique, it's kind of old school, but I thought it'd be worth mentioning, and that is, if you have some tough information to deliver, a tough conversation, it's okay to sandwich that, right? There are positive things about the individual. You always want to treat the individual with respect, point out some of the good things that you've noticed, some of their accomplishments, get to the constructive point, and then also end on a positive note. It's just a little sandwich technique there. When you do have this conversation, make sure that you have a good, strong summary as to what are the next steps. You notice in the second role play that Steve and I did, he scheduled a meeting for he and I to dig into some action items around prospecting to and getting some business from the mid-tier accounts. That's exactly what I was talking about. Get the next steps, gain buy-in, and then, not always, but as the conversations get more towards any type of performance concern, performance issue, just document it in the email. It's just the right thing to do for both parties. For the manager to make sure he or she was clear, and for the individual to make sure that they've agreed to some of these gap plans or next steps in the process.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks.
Steve, what's your point of view on this?
Yeah, Bob did a great job of covering that. I'm just going to bring up 2 points. A guy told me, gosh, this goes back 10, 15 years ago. He said, it's never okay to be mean or nasty, and it's always okay to hold the bar high. And sometimes as managers, either we think that we have to be gruff and tough if we're going to hold the bar high, or we acquiesce and we don't hold the bar high because we don't want to come across as mean or nasty. And the reality is, I don't have to be inappropriate. I don't have to be anything less than professional. I can maintain all the professionalism. In fact, I can be a positive person, and I have the right, as a matter of fact, as a manager, I have the responsibility to hold the bar high for my people. And this is not incongruent. And the other point is, I always want to focus on the issues, not the person. One of the reasons I like, again, a visual pipeline approach is I like to be able to say to someone, you know what, I think you're a great person. I enjoy being around you. I have a great time with you. I'm having trouble with this pipeline. In other words, I'm focused on the performance. I'm not focused on the person. And I'm able to separate the two. And to that extent, we can have better conversations when we can do that in a very factual, straightforward way. Focus on the issues, not on the person. Thanks, Pam.
It makes sense. One observation, we do have a couple of questions that have come in, but one observation, it would seem that more frequent effective coaching will make these hard conversations a little bit easier. No
Absolutely.
Surprises, I guess is what I'm saying. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So one of the questions is, but won't I demotivate my salespeople if I have these hard conversations with them? What do you think?
Honestly, the hard conversations are hard conversations. We can't get around that. But the reality is most people know when they're in trouble. Mm-hmm. It's not truly a surprise to them. And what they're looking for is help. They're looking for good, hard, concrete ways to get better. So avoiding the conversation, all that does, in my mind, is to prolong the situation, and it provides no help around helping people to become as productive as they can be. So, is there a risk around demotivating? I suppose, but I think that risk is relatively minor compared to allowing a person to fail.
I agree.
You know, a best practice I've tried to implement myself. I haven't always been successful, but I really do like the recurring meetings with managers, the one-on-one, the coaching time. Get it in Outlook, and I tell managers, I mean, treat it as sacred time. And it's okay if you have someone that's just really doing well, that it's a quick touch-base meeting. It doesn't have to, be an hour long. But the folks will even come to respect the fact that they have this kind of this safe haven, if you will, that they have this regular meeting. It's scheduled. It's going to go on, unless there's emergency, and it's always a good habit for a manager to get into, as Steve put it. When there's little things that pop up, of course you need to meet with them immediately, but for other things, it's a way to make sure that they get covered and kind of they keep the air nice and clear between coach and the sales rep.
Mm-hmm. This is our last question for today, and it really gets to the heart of why hard conversations are hard. So the question is, once I've had the hard conversation, how long should I give a person to respond to my coaching? How long are we going to keep Randy hanging on?
That's always a difficult decision to make, and in many organizations, that length of time is typically tied to some performance level. In other words, I'm going to need a certain level of production over a certain period of time in order for this situation to get better. I think this is another case for having a very actionable and viable pipeline system. if I'm in a situation where I've got a long selling cycle, and it's typical that it takes 6 months to close on an opportunity, well then theoretically, once I've had that conversation, I need to give somebody X number of months in order to see if they can fix it. That can be a very expensive decision. If I can be looking at a viable pipeline system and I can tell 3 months from now whether or not this person has enough opportunities that are viable opportunities to hit their numbers, I don't necessarily have to wait 6 months. Mm-hmm. I can see the future. I can see whether or not it's going to happen. So there's no one singular answer to this, but if I do have a difficult situation and I'm concerned that it's correctable, then sometimes I don't have to actually wait for the results. I can let the pipeline tell me whether or not it's going to happen.
Right. So keeping your eye on the pipeline, you don't have to put the date and outlook for when to check back. It should be more frequent and be looking at that the visual data that you're seeing.
Yeah, I'm typically weekly looking at a sales pipeline and determining is the kind of progress being made that's necessary for us to get to where we need to be, and it'll tell me whether or not that's happening. I can know it today. I don't have to wait 6 months.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent. Well, I want to thank both you, Steve, and Bob for your time and for sharing such actionable information and on how to maximize the effectiveness of coaching time. Hopefully the folks have some great takeaways. We will be not only sending out the recording, but actually sending out the slides so that you'll have those to reference, and the slides will include Bob and Steve's email address in case you want to follow up with them on anything. And I especially, once again, want to thank our sponsors. Sales 6, it's an incredible tool that makes that one-on-one meeting between the manager and rep very real, very productive, very visual, and very focused on accuracy. And Sales Talk Technologies, from channel to inside sales to face-to-face reps with their mobility app, Sales Talk is the best execution tool on the market. Since the buying process changed, the selling process had to as well, and Sales Talk does more than level the playing field. It gives your reps the edge to win and the analytics for a coach to really coach. So thank you to both of our sponsors. And we have one last announcement for those of you on the call. We will be doing another webinar on Tuesday, July 29th. Many of you perhaps have seen the book Insight Selling. John Doerr, who's the president of Rain Group, it's a sales training, coaching, and consulting company, is the author of the book and will be presenting, what sales winners do differently. And it's not an opinion. They studied over 700 business-to-business purchases from buyers with an annual purchasing power of $3.1 billion. And what they found is not only surprising, it'll change the way people sell for years to come, and they're going to share their secrets. So I hope that you will join us on Tuesday, July 29th at 2 p.m. I want to thank all of you for hanging out in spite of the fact that the World Cup was on, and the bad news is we lost. The good news is we still advance forward. So that's just a little tidbit. You can go on about your day now. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.